Welcome to Decades of Dissent, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation's webinar dedicated to highlighting the importance of dissident artists over the past 10 decades. Throughout the past 100 years, dissident artists wielded their pencils, pens, and brushes, often in spite of violent repression, to depict the uncomfortable truths of communism that words struggle to describe. Their works immortalize the horrors of communism in practice, the despair of its victims, and the bravery of its critics. I'm Ashley Davis, Director of Public Affairs, and I'm pleased to present to you today Badiucao, a Chinese political cartoonist, artist, and rights activist based in Australia. Badiucao is regarded as one of China's most prolific and well-known political cartoonists. He is being pursued by China and remains in exile. Badiucao had no formal training in art while in China. He studied law at the East China University of Political Science and Law, and he and his dorm mates accidentally watched the documentary The Gate of Heavenly Peace after it was hidden in a Taiwanese drama film. Disillusioned with China, he moved to Australia to study in 2009. His first political cartoon was about a wind-gel train collision in 2011. Badiucao is extremely active and often responds very quickly to prevailing news and events in relation to mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Chinese diaspora. His work has been used by Amnesty International, Freedom House, BBC, CNN, and China Digital Times, and exhibited in Australia, America, and Italy. He is a recipient of the 2020 Václav Havel International Prize for Creative Dissent. During today's event, Badiucao will give us an overview of his story that will help us to recognize the lengths dissidents like him will go to speak out for freedom. We are privileged to have Badiucao here with us today. The format of today's event will be a conversation between Badiucao and myself. The audience is welcome to submit questions for Badiucao throughout the event using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Badiucao, I'll turn my first question to you. So will you start off by sharing with us a bit about the importance of art and the ability to express one's opinions honestly through art?
Well, I think art has this unique role in the society that artists should share, social responsibility. I'm never a big fan for the theory, art for the sake of art, but I think art is something that helping people to express themselves. So I believe that any artist should, using their art to speak about issues that really care about in the society. And this expression should not be limited or restrained by any third-party force, especially not from a government or a authoritarian, which is outsider than the artists themselves. So that makes us naturally become almost like enemy to all authoritarian regimes. If I may, I have to say it's not just a communist regime, but there are also different regimes who try to oppress freedom of expression and restrain people's way of seeking universal human rights. So it is really fundamental for artists to actually trying to gaining back the space of speech and using our, whether it's visual language or audio language or music or form of art, to advocate for our rights, because without the freedom, there'll be no art, there'll be no creation, but propaganda.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And exactly as I was mentioning before, and our purpose for featuring different artists on our website and our Decades of Dissent collection, and then obviously wanting to do today's webinar with you, is to be able to feature that and express that, the importance of art, importance of that freedom of speech. So I understand that you did not receive formal art training in China, but I'm very curious because obviously you're extremely talented, and a lot of that I'm sure is just pure natural talent. Have you always created art ever since you were a young child, or what really inspired you to start creating art and publishing that publicly?
Well, I think this is my, I don't believe that I'm really talented. The only reason I become known as a, political cartoonist and political artist is because you cannot find another one inside of China.
Mhm.
That's simply the truth. If you do become a very artist, challenge the regime with your pen, then you will, swiftly be sent to prison or invited to the police station to drink tea, so that you're either giving up or you actually pay a huge price. I guess my unique position makes me can still relatively speak up safely. Although I still pay my price, like my family in China will be harassed, but me myself in Australia at this moment, I can still use my art to criticize against this regime, but also the way that I can both speak Chinese and English also make my potential audience larger than if I only speak one language. Uh, so I would highlight it again. I don't think it's because of my talent, but because of my unique position that makes my art to be accessible to more people around the world. However, I am born, born in a family of artists. My great parents, they were like the first group of filmmakers in China back in 1920 to 30 until 1950 when the communist regime seized the power. And then they launched this anti-intellectual movement around 1957. So both my great parents persecuted and died during the brutal campaign, which left me. Of course, this experience never disappeared in my family's history. It's like a huge shadow following you, regardless the time or space. So for me, it tells me two lessons when I heard my family's story back in the history. One is that there are people who are making arts in my family history. So if my great parents can do that, I also believe that I might be able to do that as well. And it's a lot of fun because I can see all the joy from the old films. But also, there's a warning behind, which is if you do art in China and there's no guarantee you'll be safe. You don't know which part of your art would touch the so-called red line and finally put you into this critical condition, and you could die. Seriously, you could lose your life because of your art. Because, well, I have verified with my great parents' life and many, many other artists' life from the history, but now as well. And now, I mean, my own experience is also a proof that the regime that persecuting artists um, decades ago are still the same regime because they're doing the same thing to the contemporary artists who have a rebel spirit. So yeah, that's my basic history and also why I would become myself at this day.
Thank you for sharing that. I know you mentioned, a bit about your family's experience, and obviously that had a profound impact on your life and your view of the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm curious, I'm sure our viewers are curious as well today, what your experience was like growing up in China and what was your view of the Chinese Communist Party as a child? And then how did that change or shift some at your discovery about the truth of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre? And did that view change any, or did it just heighten your thoughts about the CCP?
Firstly, I think the very name of CCP, China's Communist Party, is very a confusing term to what it is actually doing and acting at this moment. Well, now I don't believe the CCP is anything close to a idealist lefty revolutionary people anymore. And in fact, China has become this monster that combined the worst part from communism and the worst part of capitalism as well. You see this national capitalism monsters using the communist way of authoritarian management of society. But in the meantime, it's very good at using its money and capital to kind of controlling and manipulate the world from the market and economic side. So it's very hard to really define if CCP is still just merely a communist monster. It is definitely a postmodernist predator and colonizer as well, that we can see what it has done in, let's say, Africa and a lot of developing countries with its Belt Road project. So for me, I think China is definitely the same one, persecuting people back in decades, like I mentioned, but it does become a very complex organization, and it has its way to actually forcing a large multi-international corporation to collaborate with it. That we can see from many aspects, let's say, from the genocide on the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang regime. We see a lot of people are forced to become almost like slave laborers. But who are the companies that buying those products? It's not just companies from China, but actually companies from all over the world, from all those so-called, free countries. I've seen companies like Zara, companies like Nike, companies like all those very important fashion brand or other companies. So this is not just the problem of China, but also the problem of the Western world that sees the money beyond human rights, that sees the short-term profit beyond the well-being and peace for the future of the entire human being. So I think that's really the urgent problem, that it's also our world has to wake up from this nightmare and stopping just thinking about profiting making.
Thank you. And thank you for making that connection for us too. You mentioned, of course, the current Uyghur genocide in Xinjiang, and our team has been doing a lot of work on that. And obviously, like you were discussing, a lot of what is happening in China and the actions that the CCP are taking really are affecting the entire world, especially through their soft power as well. One question that I did have for you is, you've been a well-known political cartoonist for many years now. When you first started creating art, did you know that your art was going to be such a large point of interest for so many people worldwide? Or did you just simply feel that you had to speak out and that was the best way that you knew to do so?
Well, yeah, but no, it's a totally surprise, I guess. I never expect that I actually become a full-time political cartoonist and artist when I just started making those political cartoons back in like 10 years. By the time there was the incident that you've introduced in Wenzhou, there's two kind of high-speed trains colliding each other. And 10 years ago, the internet in China is very different from now. I believe by the time the Chinese government is not aware that social media could be such a powerful engine, potentially through a society change, or they are not capable to really control or censoring or doing the propaganda to kind of manipulate the social media that easily. So back in 10, but also Xi Jinping is not in power at that time either. So that was a window of almost like freedom of speech spring in China, even on Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter. So after that train colliding incident happened, I actually witnessed that how netizens are trying to use their own knowledge and power and connection to confront the official narrative, which is trying to cover the truth of that incident. Because we have to know that the high-speed train is actually a very sensitive and significant project that rolled out by the Chinese government. Remember, by the time it's trying to sell it to Americans as well. So an incident like that is really, in China, we call it losing the face. It's really a damage to the reputation of the so-called the miracle of China's technology or economy. But by the time the official narrative couldn't really tackling this public repercussion or public backslash. So it makes me really inspired and makes me want to join this big wave of challenge the government. So that the moment that I just want to add into the comments. And writing is not something that I'm really uh, proud of or good at, but drawing is definitely something that I like to share with people. So that makes me start my first cartoon. But obviously, the time has changed. The brief moment of, let's say, freedom speech spring online in China has passed. It's long gone, um, which makes me, again, this unique position. But by the time there are not just me, there are also other political cartoonists or political artists are contributing to this wave of commenting and the challenge. But now most of them are silenced, which left me become one of the handful Chinese artists who still have the freedom, but also have the courage to challenge the regime. And now I become me, but it's a totally, out of blue thing.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned, finding that courage and being willing to speak out, being willing to talk about human rights abuses. And I'm curious, where did you find the courage to speak the truth? Did you know the kinds of consequences that you were going to suffer when you first started speaking out against the CCP? And were you aware of these dangers?
Right. I guess it's also a very long story. And definitely, I wouldn't say one can just collecting all the courage at one moment. For me, I started as an anonymous artist. I know that if I show my face and let the government know who I am, I will be silenced. My family will be revenged. So I have to hide myself. Let's say maybe 5 years ago, actually until 3 years ago, I wouldn't really do an interview like this
Mhm.
or public appearance without a mask and kind of voice change as well. That's all for preparing to prevent the government knows who I am. Um, but 3 years ago, in the end of 2018, just before I'm going to have a major solo exhibition in Hong Kong, then my identity got compromised. And the national security police in China, they visited my family and threatened them in order to silence me and stop everything. So unfortunately, the show is canceled due to this just urgent situation, but also a safety issue because the police was threatening to come to Hong Kong to attending the art opening if I do not cancel the show, which makes everyone who's helping Hong Kong also extremely worried. So unfortunately, the show is canceled. But by the time I'm facing this um, critical choices. So now I know the government know who I am. Now they've located my family and starting harassing them and threatening them for me to stopping making art to criticize the Chinese government. So what do I do? What do I do? But I made this final decision that I revealed my face like I'm doing now. Um, it's because I don't believe that silence could help me to exchange safety, peace, and freedom. Actually, once you're on the list, you will always be on the list. And the only answer to bullying is you have to stand up and then fight back and use the way that they do not expect. Because I think Chinese the regime they expect that once they know who I am, I will stop. But once you tell them that's not something that you're afraid of, then they lose all the possible moves, at least for a moment. And it's also very important that I know that there are people expecting my art. I know there are people inspired by my art. So just quitting like that would be a huge disappointment for all of those people who familiar with my art and supported with my art for all those years. And obviously I wouldn't be myself if I stopped making art as I wish. Um, so with all those considerations that I choose to reveal my face in a documentary which aired in Australia. It's called China's Art for Dissident. And I think you can still viewing it even in American. If you Google it, you'll find the link. It actually recorded the very process of me being through this very hard moment of if I should reveal my face or not. But I am very happy that I choose this decision that I will continue making art in a way that I can preserve my freedom, and it's very important. And I do think that more people would kind of share my difficulty by the time, but also get inspired, because that's really the only way that we can tackle with a dominant power like that.
Thank you for sharing that. And that was one of the questions that I did have for you too. I've seen the documentary that you mentioned, and it's very powerful. Really, like you said, telling your story in detail around that time. And I really liked how, it showed your courage. And like you said, you pick up courage from different pieces of your life, not just from one experience or one memory. So I think that really shined through, like you said, in the film, and showing that experience for you. And your comments too make me think about, I'm sure there are many artists around the world who are threatened by different authoritarian regimes, and they do choose to back down out of fear for their family, for themselves, or others. And so I think it says a lot that, you decided that your art and making these human rights abuses and other abuses known is so important. So I think, thank you for that and for being willing to continue your work. One question that I did have related is, do you feel that revealing your identity and coming out to the world about who you are, instead of having to hide behind masks or voice changes, has changed how you create art in any way?
Well, definitely it granted me much more freedom, like physically. Before that, I had to be extremely careful to contacting people, to create opportunities, to organizing, let's say, political art campaigns. But now, when the mask is down, suddenly it makes things much easier. Um, uh, what I want to highlight is when you have to be in a status of anonymous, that it's very hard to establish trust to the people who you want to collaborate with. But when you can finally, face to face talking to people, it is suddenly a game change and everything become easier. But it does not come without the price. Like now, what worries me in a daily life is I receive like death threat all the time, that I actually experiencing very strange encounters with possibly Chinese agency in Australia and Melbourne as well. My internet got cyber attack all the time. So these are the things that makes things inconvenient, but still the sense of feeling that I'm no longer afraid of you, that I am showing my face, and that's just something that makes you feel very good. um, I think the most important thing for me to finally be able to show my real face, the public, is that you get a chance to talk to the people who used to refuse to talking to you because they don't know who you are, because they don't know your agenda if you remaining mysterious. And I do want to say that actually, the very gesture of revealing yourself was inspiring a lot of people, which makes me feel that this very um, cost that I'm paying is well worthy.
Thank you. Do you ever feel discouraged by the intense oppression you face by the CCP, or like you said, you feel so much more free now that you are, have shown your face. So do you feel that, discouragement, or does that give you more strength to carry on?
Well, we all know how China acts, we can expect its pattern, and we know how it will, dealing with dissident or artists who do not align with their propaganda. However, what discouraged me the most is not the persecution and harassment from Beijing, but the indifferent attitude from the free world, but the ignorance from the free world, and especially from our community, that I have to say I am hugely disappointed by a lot of people in the contemporary art scene, that people are still holding this very conservative idea that art is about art is about not about the reality, and they think being away from the real world and being away from all the political content is how you can make art pure and not being manipulated by politics. But I think it's just a way to play safe cards. I think it's just a way to refusing to communicate with the public and truly making your art to be more impactful. Um, True, we should not, artists should never become tour propaganda, whether it's from China or American or other political entity. The thing is, there's no stop for you to advocate for what you believe in person. And it is also essential for artists speaking up, especially for our time, that we're not just facing threat from CCP, but we're also facing threat, let's say, from Trumpism in America, facing the indifference to human rights, facing the inhuman treat to all the refugees globally. So that is actually the moment that the artists must speak up. However, I feel it's just not the case, at least not the case around me. And I got shutting down, or shutting out from the art world again and again by all those fancy curators, directors, and the people who are within this art community. And I think it's just a huge shame. And I do hope that I can use my own action and art to change more fellow artists around me, especially the younger ones, to tell them that there's nothing wrong to making political art, to not worrying that the gatekeepers of art were telling you this is not the contemporary art about. You are totally entitled to define what art is, as long as you act with it, as long as you create art with your true heart and understanding of this world. So that's my reaction to this question.
Thank you very much. Along those lines, you have covered so many different topics, so many different, current events in the world for many years. What is a piece of art or a few pieces of art that you're most proud of that you've created and know have caused further discussion around the world about certain current events?
Well, that's a very hard question, but there's definitely two works that I want to mentioning. One is actually a public art performance that I did stretch to several years ago, and that I did again 3 years ago as well. And it's called One Tank Man Project. So the way that I did is very simple. I just dressed up as the tank man, the Chinese guy who trying to stop the tank crashing the student back in 1989 in Tiananmen Square area. This image and this very action is always something the Chinese government trying to hide and cover and erase from the evidence and from people's memory. So I always think it's very necessary to revisit this very image, and a lot of people can actually get encouraged from this very action, including myself. So about, I think 6 or 5 years ago, I did this project by bringing a planes about 1 meter high to a city that I'm living, to the CBD area where most people were, shopping and wandering around. So I did this performance by standing on this planes in the very busy streets in that city and cosplay the tankman's look by dressing up with a white shirt, black pants, and holding two bags. On the anniversary of Tiananmen Massacre in that year, well, while I'm doing it, I do not expecting, people would recognize it because it's not in China. And I do not expect people would really appreciate. But it's really something just for myself because I want to advocate for this period of history, and it's personally very meaningful. But still, I have some very extraordinary feedback from just people passing around. And I remember there's one Chinese student who probably just came to Australia and studied there. He passed me and stopped and take a photo. And he's whispering to me saying, I know what this guy is. I know what you're trying to doing. And he say, thank you. And he just go. It's just fast. It's almost insignificant, but it plays such an important role in my heart that a performance like that is not just throwing a needle to the sea. It actually echoing with people, even to the very place that I do not expecting any response. So that gives me a huge motivation to continue rolling out this program. So after 2 years, I did a new project which is following with that. And this time I called it Tank Man. So there's not just one Tank Man, there's multiple person. And I uploaded the formula of performance, like when you have to do it and when and how and what you're gonna do it. And I posted it online with my website and also did a public call on the Twitter. So a lot of people join in. And you know what? There are actually literally hundreds of people around the world join in this political performance arts. And by dressing up like Tank Man and standing in the busiest places around the world. So, that thing is really powerful to me because it tells the memory can never be erased off. And if you find a proper form, people would follow and advocate for it and letting more people to remember this together. And ultimately, it will be a very powerful weapon to against the regime, the Beijing government, who try to, force the people to forget about it. And it's also a campaign or political artwork that engage with the social media on the internet. That's also something that almost can be turned into a formula that I followed other times, like my Liu Xiaobo street art project. That still I'm using the same way to actually upload it online and engage a lot of people to join in. And even there are Liu Xiaobo's posts appearing in Beijing, the very heart of CCP. So this is good form by engage with the internet, and this is also good cause by battling the memory amnesia from China. And that's something that I feel I'm really proud of.
Thank you. I know that was a big question, but appreciate you answering. And we do have an image of one of your Tank Man performances. I'll put it up here on the screen so our audience can see as well. So I definitely think, like you said, so powerful and a really great idea on your part. And I'm curious if you have any plans or ideas for something to commemorate the anniversary this year of the Tiananmen Square massacre. I'm sure if so, you probably don't want to share yet, but curious if you're thinking through ideas for this summer.
Well, I definitely would do something, but I also want to highlight that it's not necessary to only do that on the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes people are just You're making a homework, and the due date is 4th of June. And it's like before and after that, you don't need to worry about it, as long as you did that homework on the very day. So maybe this year or for the following years, I actually want to do it in a way that it's not just about that day, but stretch it out in different times, because memorizing do not select days, and the uprising from Chinese government do not selecting days as well. It's a daily practice. And well, I have to mention that recently this new app or social media platform called Clubhouse, and that does change a lot of people's way of expression, especially from the people from China. And there are a lot of group discussion about the Tiananmen massacre already. So it is never has to be on that day, but it can be carried out on every day. And there are a lot of memories and stories can be shared in a daily base. And I think that is really the most powerful way to kind of defeating the erase of memory from China, which actually we talk about all the time, anytime that you have opportunity.
Thank you. So I've heard you mention before, and I'm curious to hear more from you on this, but how important is it to you that your art is not copyrighted and that it is easy for people inside China, especially, to download and reshare? And can you talk a little bit more about why this strategy is really important to your work and getting the message out?
Well, firstly, that for me, social media or internet is my platform. It's also where I can have all the materials and reflect. So there's no way that I put a pay wall or something like that to stop the audience to see my work. It's also because there's no traditional venue really accepting art like mine. And if I want to show the world my art, I have to make it free. I have to make it very accessible on social media or on internet. So that's just a very natural nature of it. But also, for example, when the Hong Kong protests began, that I'm following the movement in a daily basis, and I create art every day to commentate on the daily development. And if I do not opening the copyright, if I do not allow other people to have access to it, then it's defeated the very purpose that I actually want my art become a part of the movement. It's not just a commentating on it, but it can be potentially a moving force to helping the Hong Kongers to achieve their human rights and freedom and democracy. So let's say if I wore out my art and saying you have to pay money to get access to it, then the original purpose of becoming part of protest will be in vain. I mean, all protests are free. You can't charge them.
Thank you. And I've seen, I'm sure all of us have seen so many pictures from the Hong Kong protests over the years. And within those pictures, you see posters with pictures of your art. So it's a really cool way to see how you're so involved, and it's like you're still there, protesting alongside all of the people there in Hong Kong. One question
Yeah.
that I did have, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say, I feel like it's like a revenge to my cancelled art exhibition. But when people are holding my work in the street, the whole city become my gallery. Who care about a cancelled exhibition when you can literally having thousands and thousands of people, knowing your art and valuing your art and seeing your art as their voices. So that feeling is great. And I do urge other artists to join in, and you will feel totally satisfaction more than any, fancy art opening.
Thank you. I love that phrase that you said. It's like everywhere is your gallery. Your art is everywhere. So that's a really cool way to think of it. So related, I know you comment a lot on things happening around the world. So regarding the Hong Kong democracy movement, how do you see the future of the movement moving forward, especially given the recent charges against several of the pro-democracy protest and activist leaders?
Well, it's definitely a very devastating situation now. Obviously, any protest on the ground or even on the internet would become very dangerous for the people in Hong Kong. So that's why we see the movement become more internationally allying and lobbying at this moment. And unfortunately, a lot of activists have to flee, and even the other people have to flee from Hong Kong to seeking a safe and free home again. That's obviously a very sad situation. But I do not think the difficulty would, just kill the willing of Hong Kongers. It will not just eliminate this strong spirit of the Hong Kongers. They might not have, they might be not able to do a protest in Hong Kong, but the protest will continue in many different forms, like in art. As I know, a lot of Hong Kong artists are actually trying to express themselves within their art, also on an international stage. They will be lobbying all around the world, in America, in Europe, in all those countries who would value human rights or who should value human rights. Um, and also, I think a very important thing is Hong Kongers to preserve their own identity and culture. Because what Chinese government trying to do in Hong Kong is like wiping out their languages, wiping out their traditional of the value of freedom, wiping out the very existence of Hong Kong identity and culture. So there are a lot of things can be seen not as kind of active or aggressive as a strong social movement, but preserving the very root of Hong Kong culture and language and then other aspects is also a very resistant, way to kind of protest. And actually, it is a very long-lasting job, which obviously will belong to ordinary people, but also to people who are working in the culture industry. So there are still a lot of space to maneuver in. And I guess the most important thing is the world must not turn a blind eye on Hong Kong's situation. The world must see this is a warning to all of us that the Hong Kongs today could be the world's tomorrow if we just allowing China become aggressive in its pace. And if we do nothing, then tomorrow all the pain and the blood can really from us ourselves.
Thank you very much. So I've heard you say before, and I believe you might have said this in the documentary that you mentioned, that you first really started to feel free when you moved to Australia and became an Australian citizen. So I'd love to hear a bit more from you about what does freedom mean to you and why did you say that? Why did you feel that way?
Well, initially when I go to Australia, the freedom means I can become an artist. I can fulfill my potential, which I wouldn't be able to do it in China because firstly, I'm feared that if I become an artist, I would repeating the tragedy of my great parents. Secondly, I know that how tough the life in China, and how easily, even given the circumstance that I'm born in Shanghai, a very privileged city, but I still can see a very fixed trajectory of my life, that I'll be slaves of I don't know if you're familiar with this term, it's called 996. It's the very condition of the middle class people in China. So it means you start working from 9 a.m. and you end at work 9 p.m. and it works 6 days a week. So that's just the normal for ordinary middle class people in China if you want to, earn your position in society. So that means if I stay in China, I can see my life is so doomed and kind of restrained in an area that myself will never be able to kind of fully grow and fulfill my potential. But being able to go to Australia and become a citizen or have the permanent visa means that all the potential and possibility of my life become possible again. It means if I want to be an artist, I can. If I want to be a carpenter, I can. If I want to be an IT guy, I can. And the society is very inclusive and forgivable, which means if you fail, that the well-being system and social fairness will hold you and will give you different chance to replug yourself to a different position, which is something that I cannot imagine in China. But now I guess the freedom, the definition of freedom is different again, because like 10 years ago when I just landed in Australia, it's all about me. It's just about myself, how I can become a new person, a person who have a very unpredictable but promising future. But now I see freedom as a basic need for all of us, not just for me, but also for the people in Australia, for the people in America, the people in China, for the people in Middle East, in Africa. It's a right that we shall all have, but it's also a right that a lot of people do not have, not just in China, but also in developing countries like Australia or in America. So that makes me want to fight. It makes me want to use in my art to advocating for those people more. So now I guess the freedom is something beyond personal interest. It's something become my life goal that I want to help others to achieve it as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So one question, you mentioned, moving to Australia allowed you to create your art. That gave you the opportunity to do so. Did your friends and family know about your art when you first started? And if so, how did they respond, or how did others in your life respond to the art you were creating?
Actually, they don't. Like I said that in the very beginning of my art history, I try to separate my life. And when I'm doing my art and appear as Badiucao, the artist, I'm always wearing a mask. I'm this anonymous, mysterious artist. But to my friends or my family, that I have to put away this side of my life. I have to separate them, and that's the only way that I can um, functioning normally. But also protect them as much as I can. So it's a very different situation that I never really get a chance to explain myself to my friends and family. And when my identity is compromised, and when my friends and family are told by the Chinese police that what I'm doing, I don't think it is very easy for them to accept. I even think that it's very hard for them to understand what is going on. And unfortunately, I wouldn't really have a chance to explain to them properly, because the situation is the more that I contacted with them, the more valuable they'll become to the Chinese police. So actually now I'm cutting all the connection with my family and friends in China, so that if the police want to get to me via them, it wouldn't work. If the police want throwing pressure or threaten to me via them, it wouldn't happen, and they have to come directed to me. So that become the way that I can sort of protect them or leave them outside of this terrible storm.
Thank you. And that's very brave, what you've had to choose to do. And I think it should not go unnoticed how brave that is. Along a similar note, and kind of wrapping up with one last question, and then I'll give you some time to say any last words that you liked. But we have some artists here on the webinar today, a lot of great supportive comments. So what advice do you have for fellow artists and activists around the world who may face persecution by their government for speaking out?
Well, if we united, if we advocate for each other, I always believe that, human rights is not a privilege for just one group of people. It's a universal right, which means I have to follow this principle that I want to use my art, not just helping the people in China, but also helping the people who are suffering from persecution and unfair treatment in any society. Which means if there is a artist in Cuba got persecuted, I want to advocate for her. If there is a activist got persecuted in America due to his or her actions against Trump, I would like to support her. If there's anyone who are doing the right cause against any government, I must stand up and stand with that person. And that's my message to my fellow artists and activists. Don't just restrain in your own area and specialty and topics which concern you, but also put yourself in a broader content to learn more about the pain in different countries and try to create an ally and support each other. Because sometimes it's very hopeless to force the government domestically. But if there is international pressure, well, the things will be much easier and the situation can be turned around. So we must unite in helping each other and learn about each other's pain and concern in different societies. Because ultimately, if there's one person is not free and not enjoy the human rights, all of us are not enjoying the human rights universally.
Thank you. And a lot of people on the call as well are big fans, big supporters of yours, and are wondering, how can they best support your work?
Well, sharing my work, repost my work, tell your friend about my work, but also tell your friend about other artists' work about social issues. And I do appreciate all the support, financially or spiritually, because at this moment, like I said, that it's very hard for artists like me to get into the traditional arts venues in the industry, which means there's no showing opportunities in galleries, there's no art fair, there's no festival. And the only way that I can survive is throwing contribution from the people who loves my art. And I will continuing to make my art free on internet so more people can see it and own it and print it and use it for their protest. But in order for artists like me to continue independent work without worrying about livelihood that much, then your support is very essential.
Thank you for sharing that. So before we wrap up, I just want to give you, Badiucao, a few minutes. If there are any final words that you have to say or anything else that you wanted to share with our audience today, feel free to do so.
Well, I guess I want to say, if I have to choose between making an art and making an act, I would rather making an act to change the society. And I think that will redefine the art. So if you're artists who are worrying that what you're doing will not be seen as traditional art, don't worry about it, because what you're doing will define art in the future. And also for all the audience and the people who appreciate art, try to see art in a different way. And that's the very supportive way to helping artists like me and others. So thank you. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Badiucao, not only for joining us, but also for helping us properly understand what life under communism is really like, and for your continued bravery in combating the CCP through your art. And thank you to all of our attendees as well for joining us. You can find more information about upcoming VOC events at victimsofcommunism.org. You can also follow our work on Twitter and Facebook at VO Communism. For the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, I'm Ashley Davis. Thank you all again for attending and have a great day.